So this talk is going to be a little different in that before you heard a very top-down approach. You have these amazing inspirational leaders that are talking to you kind of on an organizational level. My spin will be sort of looking at things from the bottom up, sort of where all of you are sitting. You know, my journey has been very random and very uninformed, so I think this might be a good narrative for you to hear and reflect on and sort of maybe not make the mistakes, if you want to even call them that I did. So this is the Junior Faculty Development Forum, so congratulations for taking an investment in yourselves and developing yourselves professionally. And I'm going to give an overview on education. So I'm from Jefferson with Dr. White, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. My role in the department, I'm Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine and Vice Chair for Education in the department. In the medical school, I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty Development. And in the hospital, I run the In Situ Simulation program. So In Situ Simulation is essentially simulation outside of the simulation center. Just because people do well at the simulation center doesn't necessarily mean that those behaviors will translate into the clinical environment. So we sort of broke down those beautiful $1 million simulation centers and we take them to the clinical environment. So that's sort of what I do. And more importantly, I think I'm obligated to report this. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. So most of my time is spent in faculty development. So think about, all of us can really empathize with students. We've all been students before. We've had scaffolding when we were students. We had curricula. We had classes. We had school. It sort of shaped our development. Then we became residents. Then we had residency. And we had block schedules. And that shaped our development. But as faculty members, some of you are faculty members, do you have that scaffolding? Doesn't quite exist. So my job is really to think about that continuum of learners. Mind you, at time zero, when I was sitting exactly where you're sitting right now, I had no idea what faculty development was. I didn't even know that it was a position. I just sort of knew that there were clerkships, there were residency program directors, and that's pretty much it. But now, my time is really spent at the top of those stairs, working on faculty. So my goals and objectives today. My overarching goal is just to get you to think a little bit more critically about different pathways to medical education leadership. You know, all of us like to think about what our 5-year, 10-year plans are, and we sort of fancy having a leadership role. And my goal today is to show you that there are so many permutations to arrive at a leadership position. Specifically, I'm going to do 3 things. I want to talk about my personal experiences in med ed as a discussion point. I want to relate the importance of professional development, ongoing professional development, and faculty development. And lastly, I want to sort of end with some pearls, several strategies that you can take home and start using to ensure that you're successful. So a long time ago, I didn't have a crystal ball. I wish I was fierce as the Wicked Witch of the West and had a crystal ball to know exactly what I was going to do, but I didn't. So when I think back and I reflect a little bit on my journey so far, it's been really random. So we talked about saying no to opportunities. You will soon see that I basically said yes to practically everything. So we'll talk about this random nature and how I arrived here and how, looking back, this random nature could have been a little bit more fluid, could have been a little bit more continuous. Because I think as we grow, it's important to always stop and reflect to really refine our journey moving forward. So it's really important. So people talk about these 1-year plans and these 5-year plans and checking in with a coach and checking within a chair and checking with a mentor. And it's really important for that to happen. Otherwise, we're going to be on autopilot. And then you'll wake up 5 years from now and realize, I'm still the assistant clerkship director. This is not really what I wanted to do. I'm really not happy. And you've wasted 5 years. Not wasted, but you could have done so much with those 5 years. So I think pausing to reflect is very important. So my journey, once upon a time, a long time ago, when I was much younger, more hair, it was in 2005 when I graduated medical school, and I thought that I was bound for the community. I really wanted to be a bread and butter community doc. So I went to NYU for med school, and I decided to stay at Bellevue Hospital for my training. Bellevue, if most of you know Bellevue, it's in the heart of New York City. It's the oldest public hospital now in the country. We see a very large volume of patients. our doors are open to the entire world. If you have health insurance, if you don't have health insurance, there's no such thing as anybody being illegal. It was a great place to work. It was a great place to practice medicine, and it was a great place for me to acquire that skill set to really be that community doctor. So I learned all the skills, and I thought this was fantastic. It's a 4-year program. And in the 4th year, we have an option to take a month and do something really neat and really cool. Some of us do ultrasound for a month. Some of us do simulation for a month. Some of us travel for a month. We had this 1-month rotation in Romania, in rural Romania, in Transylvania, where there's this one hospital that's sort of like responsible for like the entire Northeast equivalent. Okay, so dig that just for a second. One hospital for this super duper large catchment area, right? How do patients get to you? They can't. There's like mountains and rivers and bodies of water. So what we did is we had these mobile ICUs, and these were pretty badass. These were awesome. So we had helicopters that were set up like ICUs on the inside. We had vans that were set up like ICUs on the inside. And we went out to places when we got calls, and we went to families, and we intubated their loved ones on the table. Their family members gave, BVMs. We stabilized, and we brought them to the hospital. So it was a lot of fun when we did that and traveled and went out into the fields. But most of the time, I was in the ED doing nothing and was really bored waiting for these really cool calls to happen. So I found this. So back around the early 2000s, ultrasound wasn't really that integrated into the curriculum. It was pretty new. It was in the very nascent stages of its implementation in our pedagogical and our educational programs. So I started playing around with it, and one of the Romanian attendings taught me ultrasound, taught me lung ultrasound, which was very forward-thinking back then, and I diagnosed my first pneumothorax. I was like, holy moly, this is the coolest thing ever. Still didn't want to go into academics, still wanted to be a community doc, but wanted to be an awesome community doc with this point-of-care technology. So what did I do? Went back to New York, got together my CV, dusted it off, and applied for an ultrasound fellowship. So at the time, Mike Stone was in New York. Mike Stone has done a lot of point-of-care ultrasound, a lot of nerve block ultrasounds. So it was one of my role models and one of my mentors. So I went to Kings County, and I spent a year there at Kings County, and I got my skills. I was ready. I was excited. I had a couple of community jobs lined up. And then the person that ran the simulation program at Kings County decided to leave. He decided to bounce, take a better position elsewhere, and now there is no simulation director. So earlier we were talking about generational gaps. So the chair at the time was like, oh no, we don't have a simulation director, but we have somebody that did ultrasound. Ultrasound and simulation are really similar. Do you want to be the simulation director? Do you see how disparate those two things are? So I was new. I was excited by the opportunity that somebody liked me. Wow, you like me. You want me to stay here. This is great. So I said yes, not knowing anything about simulation. So I took on this position, and I said yes, when perhaps maybe I should have said no and suggested one of my colleagues from residency who really wanted to do it. But I didn't have the foresight. So I took that position. And over time, I did a lot of simulation at Kings County. And while all this was happening, the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, who's a pretty cool dude, wanted to create a simulation center for the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation. How many of you are from New York or have been in New York? Okay, so HHC, the Health and Hospitals Corporation, is the largest public hospital system in the country. We have 13 hospitals. No matter where you are in New York, if you don't have health insurance, you can go to Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. You can go to Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. You can go to Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx. You can go to Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan. And you'll get the same care as you would at any private hospital. And it was awesome. So each of those hospitals, however, has a simulation center. So Bellevue has NYU. Kings County has Downstate. Jacobi has Einstein. Elmhurst has Sinai. But there are some other hospitals here like Lincoln and Harlem Hospital and Queens Hospital Center that didn't have simulation centers. So his vision was, I want to create a simulation center for those hospitals that don't have academic affiliates, that don't have their own respective simulation centers. So I was part of the team because I took this position in Kings County. I was now sort of the expert. Again, fake it till you make it. Seriously, there's truth to that. So I sat in this committee, and we built a simulation center in the Bronx on the Jacobi campus. It didn't belong to Jacobi, but it was in the Bronx for the entire Health and Hospitals Corporation. So anytime there was a lawsuit, anytime there was a claim, anytime there was a blip on the radar in the patient safety office, like we're having problems with airways at Harlem Hospital, we'd invite people up, they'd come to us, we'd train them. Or we'd pack our van, we were kind of like the A-team, you know, all of you are too young, but we'd pack our van and we'd go down to the hospital and we'd do a lot of in situ simulations, and it was great. And what was most inspirational for me was the impact that our programming and simulation had in the corporation. How many of you are familiar with shoulder dystocias? Right, so shoulder dystocias is during a normal vaginal delivery. The anterior shoulder gets stuck in the canal, there's some trauma there, and that leads to brachial plexus injury. And across the corporation, in 2010 to 2012, we had 16 lawsuits every year around shoulder dystocias. And for those simulation champions in the room that do a lot of shoulder dystocia simulations, you'll learn that this all comes down to communication. If you communicate well, if you employ team steps, if you have the shared mental model, you can change that. And simulation was a great vehicle for that. So 1 year after we had our shoulder dystocia courses, our shoulder dystocia rate went to 2. And that's where I was floored. I'm like, wow, this stuff is legit. This is really great. Maybe I should have done an ultrasound fellowship. Maybe I should have done a simulation fellowship. And that's what I did, because I had an imposter syndrome. Disclaimer, heads up, imposter syndrome never goes away. You can get a PhD and an MD and a DO and whatever. That imposter syndrome will never go away. So I did a sim fellowship while I was in attending, part-time. It wasn't that hard. But, you know, it still didn't go away. So backtracking, I did my sim fellowship. I was working at Kings County, and then my chair comes back up to me and says, you know, this simulation stuff can really help our patient safety efforts, right? So we have a patient safety committee. They were hearing all the things that we were doing in the city with shoulder dystocias and airway. And he was like, I want you to get some training in patient safety and quality. I want you to meld those two, and I want you to bring those back to Kings County. So again, not knowing how to say no, I said yes, and I enrolled after that into another part-time fellowship through the Greater New York Hospital Association and the United Hospital Fund. This is a great patient safety fellowship if you do live in New York. It's free, it's awesome, it teaches you everything you need to know about patient safety and quality tools, from conducting root cause analyses to failure modes and effects analyses. So this was great, and then I started doing a lot of these patient safety simulations in the hospital system. And I started saying yes to problems. So OB had a problem, they knocked on my door. Family medicine had a problem, they knocked on my door. Still in my mind, I never really felt that I was academics. I felt that I was sort of like doing this stuff because ultimately I'm still going to be a community doctor, but I'm just kind of just saying yes all the time. And I don't want to make this about me, but I want you to learn from my mistakes, or if you want to call them mistakes, otherwise. That imposter syndrome didn't go away. I really wanted to learn a little bit more about education. I really felt that I was a phony. I didn't know these things. I just knew these things superficially. So after all this stuff, I went back to school and got a doctorate in education at Columbia. So you're probably thinking, holy moly, this guy's psychotic. And you might be right on some levels. I'm definitely neurotic. But, you know, I think my journey to this point, you know, up to this point here showed me that ultrasound was great, simulation was great, patient safety was great, but these were all just tools. These were educational tools. These were adjuncts. These were pedagogies, as we call them in the educational world. So the least common denominator was education, and I thought this is a great way for me to really have something objective and give me some credibility. So I did that, and now so that was around 2013. And fast forward to now, for family reasons, my spouse and I moved to Philadelphia. We shopped around, and I couldn't be more happy to have wound up at Jefferson. So when I applied to Jefferson, I just applied as a regular clinical doctor. I thought, you know, I'll be an emergency medicine physician. Maybe I'll do some simulation. I have some patient safety skills that I can lend to you. But then when my CV went to the Office for Faculty Affairs, the Dean for Faculty Affairs sort of said, you know what? We have a vacancy in a dean's position in the Office for Faculty Development. We need an assistant dean for faculty development. And then I got a phone call from my chair. It said Christopher saying that, yeah, we want to come down. We want you to come down again because we want you to interview again with us because apparently there's a dean's position available. I'm like, dean of what? Dean of students? Dean of residents? He's like, no, dean of faculty development. I had no clue what faculty development was. I'm like, what is that? So how many of you know what faculty development is? Right? It's essentially the same thing like as we do with our students and giving them the scaffolding to grow and learn. With our residents, giving them the residency program, the curriculum, the block schedule, the dedicated conference time for them to learn. Faculty development is no different. And I had no idea then because I was stuck in my own little fishbowl. And over the last 8 to 10 years of my career, I've been jumping from one fishbowl to another, kind of making these bigger moves, but with the mindset of learning, with the mindset of growing, and with the mindset of always saying yes. So in your careers, there will be times where it's good for you to say yes. In your careers, there will be time for you to be critical and say no, or better yet, that's a great question, let me get back to you. But that's sort of what I did. So I took the position, and now I'm at Jefferson. And if you ask me how I identify as an emergency medicine physician 100%. Total EM physician. You can't take that away from me. 50% of my salary is bought down by 50% of my time is spent in the dean's office. 25% of my time is doing that in situ simulation stuff that I was talking about. 20% of my time is working in the ER as a clinician, running our medical education fellowship and being vice chair for education. And the other 15% of the time is running this co-curricular pathway in med ed. Are you guys good at math? What's the problem with the schematic? Add up the numbers. What was that? It's more than 100%. And that is exactly, I'm living proof to what happens when you say yes. You get overcommitted, right? You take on maybe two. So this is fine, and I've worked out a solution to this, and I will share that solution with you. But this is what can happen to you. I loved one of the comments made earlier about really buying down your clinical time to make sure that you can actually enjoy your clinical shifts, like listening to that old record again that inspires you. And I definitely achieved that. But if I'm going to do all these things correctly, there needs to be some way that I don't fail. Because the more you say yes, the more you take on, and the more balls you're juggling, you're going to drop one. And the minute you drop one, you failed that job. So it's really important to figure out how much you can juggle. And if you do drop one of those balls, which one of those balls is rubber and will bounce back up again and not be glass and break. Does that make sense? So one thing I attribute to sort of like this very random path is I didn't have a Yoda. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a mentor very early on. I was never told to seek out a mentor. In hindsight, I probably should have. So that's my kind of very 10,000-foot narrative as to going through things, with, tunnel vision without really much foresight about direction. Things to consider, some critical things to consider early on as you're thinking about your individual career trajectories is to think about your passion and more specifically, think about your audience. Which is that audience that you enjoy teaching? Is it students? Do you love coming into shift and teaching medical students that are pluripotent, that can go in all different directions and become, surgeons and EM docs and internists? Or do you not like that because it slows you down and slows down your workflow and frustrates you? Do you want to deal with a more sophisticated learner, like the resident, that requires some pruning, but a lot less than a medical student? Or do you want to work with faculty and help faculty become better teachers? Because ultimately, I really do, I don't know if I believe in trickle-down economics, but I believe in trickle-down education. And I think if you really develop good faculty teachers, you're very likely to improve all aspects of that learning pyramid. So we know what the traditional options are in GME. We know that they're program directors, assistant program directors, associate program directors. In your respective shop, there might be an ultrasound director for residency, a simulation director for residency. For the UME-minded folks in the room, there's clerkship directors and the like. Similarly, if there's a simulation person dedicated to undergraduate medical education or an ultrasound person dedicated to undergraduate medical education, I think a lot of these roles are not new to us, right? We've seen these before. But the landscape is changing, and this went into one of the questions that I asked the two speakers earlier, is that the EM wave has arrived, right? I think EM has been a new field for a while, and it took us a very long time to penetrate some of the barriers in medical schools, penetrate some of the barriers in leadership positions in organizations. And now we're seeing a lot more opportunities than we ever did before. And for those of us in the nascent stages of our careers that really haven't had a dialogue about this, we don't even know that some of these even exist for us. We don't even consider these as some of the options for us. We're in residency, and then we're always asked, are you going to go into community or are you going to go into academics? Oh, great, academics, great. What are you going to do? Are you going to be a residency director or do you want to be a clerkship director? We always ask these binary questions that sort of like to lump us into nice, even categories, but it's not like that. It's more messy. It's sort of like taffy. It's like all over the place. It's not easy. You can't sort of like put them into nice, clean buckets. Exemplar here. Say you're interested in mentorship in students. Maybe you're a budding assistant dean for student affairs. If you like changing curriculum and like changing the curriculum in the medical school, like Chris Fox was talking about, maybe you want an assistant dean position in academic affairs. If you like that faculty bit, maybe you want to work in the Office for Faculty Affairs or the Office for Faculty Development, and the list goes on. If you like recruitment, there's so many EM deans, like the program director at Temple, J.J. Ufberg, who not only is a program director at Temple Emergency Medicine's residency program, but is also the assistant dean of admissions in the medical school. Residency, we think about program directors, but there's another sphere above that, right? The dean's office has a dedicated office for graduate medical education, where you're responsible for informing all the residency programs in the organization. It's a pretty powerful position. These are the people that we call designated institutional officers, DIOs. This is who they are. Diversity and inclusion. Some of you may know Bernie Lopez, who's our diversity dean, and he too is an EM position. And then simulation in itself too has risen into the dean's office and is now a distinct dean's title. So for those of you that are simulation bound, it doesn't have to end with students. It doesn't have to end with residents. You can inform the vision. You can inform the direction of your organization with simulation in one of these dean's roles. So I guess what I'm trying to convey to you here is that there are way more options that exist for you to consider. There's a larger menu to consider because there's a whole different world out there that we do not know unless we jump out of our fishbowl and explore these options. Any questions up to this point? Great. So, yes.
How much did your imposter syndrome delay you from your final outcome versus push you towards being better and then having your meandering career path where you can only connect the dots backwards?
Right.
Would you do it again the same exact way?
So I think we put so much in having to be a content expert before we say yes to something, right? Some of us don't want to take a position because we feel we don't have the training for it, or I need to take coursework in that, or I need to take a workshop in that. In reality, in the real world, outside of medicine, in the worlds of law, in the world of human resources, in the organizational world, that imposter syndrome exists, but people just rise to the position and there's a lot of just-in-time learning, where there's a lot of learning on the job. For some reason, because our education has been so organized and stratified, where we go through high school, go through college, go through medical school, go through residency, we've been brainwashed to think that there is this sort of like this very stepwise fashion. So I think most of us have that imposter syndrome built in because we're not felt to be imposters, because before we rise to a position, we have done dedicated training. So things change when we become a faculty member. And it's okay if we feel that imposter syndrome, but my answer to you is maybe it was a waste of time having done all those fellowships. Maybe it was a waste of time having done those educational programs and getting those degree programs. You don't need to do that. If you want to, all the power to you, go ahead and do that. But it's not permissive. You don't need to have that. It's not sort of lock and key. So I think that's a great question. So this is why professional development is essential, right? When we talk about professional development, it's important to really immerse ourselves in the scaffolding that'll help us make these decisions. So when I talk about that, so this is bamboo scaffolding. I took these pictures out in Hong Kong. I think it's really awesome. We use sort of like steel scaffolding, but bamboo is cheaper, it's tougher, it lasts longer, it's awesome, and I thought this is a great metaphor for faculty development because bamboo is resilient. So we want our faculty to be resilient. So whether you're taking CME courses or maintenance and certification courses or certificate programs in education or leadership programs, I think it's really important to be very mindful of scaffolding for your own development, and that scaffolding is typically going to be in the form of faculty development. Just so what it is, there's a definition, but this is pretty self-explanatory. It's those programs that help us make our skill set better, to develop deficits in teaching, deficits in research. The funny thing is that most of us go through medical training, and then at some point in our career, we're told, congratulations, you get a pat on the back, and now you're a teacher. We've never received formal training in education. Kindergarten teachers spend years to learn how to teach 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. And now we're training sophisticated learners that are going to impact patient safety and make these critical decisions, and we don't have that role to really inform the way that we teach. It just seems really ironic. So faculty development programming is a great way for you to get that teaching experience. So on the individual level, we can address individual knowledge gaps. On the organizational level, we can make our departments even better. And this is exactly what both of our speakers said earlier. Their departments are stronger because their faculty are stronger. Their faculty are stronger because they've adopted a growth mindset that they need to continuously learn. And if you're a big subscriber to Carol Dweck and like that growth mindset platform, faculty development is really what can get you there faster. So why? Why bother? Why do we care about faculty development? Why do we want to make ourselves better? Well, we're always mindful about advancing our careers. Career advancement is key. So this is what a typical faculty development program looks like, right? So in order for you to achieve academic success, you need to have mentorship. You want to have a mentor. Career development planning. Now, this can happen in your department through your respective vice chair or vice chair for education or your chair. And then almost all of you should have an annual performance review at the end of your academic year. If you do these 3 things and are mindful of these 3 things and tack on faculty development, you're doing good. That's a good start. And secondly, the educational landscape is changing. What do I mean by that? Right? Our students are getting younger. Our residents are getting younger. Faculty members are getting older. There's a disconnect in learning technology. There's a disconnect in where this learning happens, right? The clinical learning environment is one thing. I think the way that we learn in the ED or the ICU or the floors is different than what it was before. We're really more reliant on technology, so I think there's a disconnect between teacher and learner. And then we're having learners that have career changes in life. I love this schematic. This is not from medicine, but this is from higher education. Our baby boomers are in purple, and these are our faculty members. So take a look at the faculty profile on the left with some Generation Xers. And this is going to change. It's going to get more and more blue. With our students, our boomers are kind of creeping out. Generation Xers are coming in, and Generation Yers are coming in, aka our millennials. Now, I don't want to make this another talk about millennials, but I want to make this a talk about the generational divide, and for us to be cognizant of the fact that this generational divide is going to influence our success as teachers. So another reason why we should care is our learner environments are mixed. Our learners are mixed. Some of our students are older with more experience, and they're bringing this experience into the clinical workplace, while some of them are new and younger than ever before. But the truth of the matter is that these mixed learning environments are going to be very close to what real work environments are going to look like. Now you layer on faculty challenges. So we already spoke about faculty members in medicine that don't have formal training in education, that have no formal training in being teachers, but then add on the layer of faculty taking care of patients, of having to educate so many different learners. For those of you that have precepted learners in the ED, how many learners are you precepting at any given time? You might have a student. You might have residents. You might have a resident who's an intern, or a resident who's a second year or a third year, who requires a lot more or a lot less hand-holding, respectively. Time constraints. So I think being mindful of these challenges can help us in our normal day-to-day workplace, which kind of looks like this. We're doing a lot of patient care. We're supervising residents and students. We're doing a lot of bedside teaching. And then, oh yeah, there's wellness. And we need to be mindful of wellness as well. And we talk about faculty development. We really have expanded that to faculty development and faculty wellness and resiliency, because unless our faculty are resilient, unless our faculty can get knocked down and roll with the punches and be able to adapt to change, they won't be able to model that behavior to their students and their residents. Again, trickle down faculty development. I really do believe there's truth in that. So what can we do to expand our toolkit? What can we do to ensure that we have the right tools? Now, we don't have to do a lot of this, but to bridge us there are plenty of faculty development opportunities, and I think Chris spoke about some of these. Now, at our place, we have faculty development programming that's informed by the needs of our faculty. Every year, we send out a survey to find out, what do you want to see in next year's program? Do you want to see more on assessment? Do you want to see more on feedback? Do you want to see more on simulation? We develop programs and we tweak them. This is very similar to those PDSA, those Plan, Do, Study, Act plans. So think about faculty development programming at your institution. Do you have programming at your institution? I'm going to make the assumption and say yes. If you're affiliated with a medical school that's accredited by the LCME, the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, this is a requirement for your medical school to have LCME accreditation. So if you're at a medical school with LCME accreditation, and most of you are, you have dedicated faculty development programming. So my first advice to you is to seek out these programs, see what's available, and if you don't have dedicated, really robust programming, a lot of the programming that academic centers have is open access, and you can resource that. Harvard, for example, fantastic faculty development program. All of their stuff is free. Everything is recorded. Really awesome. Another place, Stanford, pretty good. Another place, UCSF, pretty good. Another good place, Jefferson. I'm going to make a plug for our place, and it's free and it's open, and I kind of invite you to take a look at our resources. So say you don't want to be limited to institutionally specific organized faculty development programming. Obviously, you can be self-directed and study things on your own, and there are lots of journals out there that will show you how to be better teachers, that would help you navigate your futures in academic medicine. But if you wanted something a little bit more formalized, like a workshop or a certificate program or a fellowship or a longitudinal program, there are other things that you can do without going back to school, like I mentioned before when I spoke about dedicated master's programs in education. How many of you are familiar with Coursera? Yeah? So I think it's one of the best exemplar for a MOOC, a massive online open access course where there are these fantastic courses that are offered from institutions across the country that are made available to the public. There's a great one on positive psychology, and one of my medical education fellows and I presented that. So it's really robust. It's really high quality work. You just sign up. These are some of the schools that share their courses on Coursera, and you can take some of the courses that some people pay massive amounts of tuition for free. Some you have to pay for, but the vast majority are free for you. This is an example of one on feedback given by somebody from Boulder, Colorado, from Human Resources. But some of the stuff that she mentioned in her talk was so fantastic and so immediately applicable to our audience in healthcare. I actually suggest that you take a look at this and take a look at Coursera. How many of you are involved in assessment of students, assessment of residents? Maybe some of you have a side gig on the side where you're writing test questions. If you're in assessment and want to learn more about assessment, the National Board for Medical Examiners has NBMEU, which is a free course that gives you this entire curriculum about how to become a master assessment person. Assessment is always that A word. Most people are, sort of cringe when they hear the word assessment because, they don't feel there's that imposter syndrome about assessment. What do we use for assessment? This is a great course to sort of help placate some of that imposter syndrome. How many of you are familiar with the faculty incubator program through Academic Life and Emergency Medicine? So Academic Life and Emergency Medicine has several incubator programs. One for chief residents called the Crincubator. Another one called the Fellowship Incubator, if you're in a fellowship, and it lets you kind of work with this community of practice of other people in fellowships. And then my favorite, the Faculty Incubator, where you work with other faculty members all across the country on Slack, on this virtual medium. And this is sort of your curriculum. This is what you're learning. You're learning a lot about developing your educational philosophy, about program evaluation, about publishing educational research. And what's so awesome about this is the minute once you start enrolling in this, you'll develop colleagues. And once you develop colleagues, you'll develop a writing group. And almost every faculty incubatee has published, on average, 4 to 5 academic scholarly papers that are PubMedable from this program. So I believe applications are typically due in the fall or just after the winter break. Take a look at this. This is a fantastic program, and I think it only costs $1,500 to enroll for a year-long period. We spoke about the ACEP Teaching Fellowship earlier, and then I think it's important for us to look outside of our society. The Association for American Medical Colleges has the LEAD program. It's a leadership program in education and development. This is some of the stuff that they cover. You can look this up online. But even if you just wanted resources in general, the AAMC website has a lot of great resources, particularly the affinity groups. One affinity group that I like very much is the GFA, the Group on Faculty Affairs. So if you're a faculty member looking to develop yourself, go to the AAMC website, go to the Group on Faculty Affairs Professional Development tab right there, and you'll have access to workshops, PowerPoints, and webinars that are archived and recorded. So what about foundations and pedagogy? So we all understand that, understanding education is really important. So the bottom line question that I get all the time is, do you get a degree? How many of you are considering getting a degree in education at some point in your careers? A master's in education? A master's in health professions education? Okay. Most people think about these degree programs as permissive, as sort of a passport to get a dean's position. So if your vision, as I mentioned at the start of my talk, if you wanted to be a dean of academic affairs or a dean for faculty development or a dean for graduate medical education, most of the individuals that sit in those roles are mudfuds, have MD PhDs, and have a PhD in education. We're seeing a growing number of these individuals having masters in education. You don't necessarily, mudfuds, is that? Oh, MD PhDs, mudfuds, yeah. Because there's a lot of theory out there, and there are a lot of things that can inform the way you put together a curriculum, that can inform the workshops you put together, and it's nice to have all this information nicely packaged for you in a degree program that, is credible, that is objective. Most fellowships are non-ACGME credited. They don't come with some sort of objective metric. So having that degree might be a nice option. Going to a program and enrolling in a master's in education might open you up to new teachers and new students and give you a community of practice that can offer a soundboard for you to, work with and develop scholarly inquiry and projects with. And it'll definitely expose you to different research methodologies, especially qualitative research methodologies for those individuals that are very much into simulation-based research. The cons, I think these are pretty self-explanatory. They cost money, they're timely, we have multiple responsibilities to juggle. Sometimes the content might not be directly relevant to our work in healthcare. And then there are not that many programs that are conducive to our lifestyle in education, in emergency medicine, where we can attend night classes or see things virtually. So in this regard, there's no right answer, but I think for all of you, it doesn't seem, at least right now, in this stage of your training, that this is a consideration. So we spoke about different silos and different ways and different pathways to get to academia vis-a-vis undergraduate medical education and graduate medical education, but there are others. We know about ultrasound. I think simulation is a really easy one, and we don't necessarily need to be tethered to an educational program to quote-unquote be academic. Simulation has now been used as a tool for patient safety and clinical quality. Earlier, I mentioned to you about the impact that we had with shoulder dystocias. Another example that we've done at Jefferson is really use simulation to address low-frequency, high-stakes events in the ED. What do I mean by that? Think about endotracheal intubations. Think about that one endotracheal intubation that you did that probably didn't go as favorably as you hoped for. Think about what the reason for that was. Was it just position? Was it habitus? Or was it something educational? Was it something procedural? Was it something that was based on your learner? Did your learner just not have the skill set that she or he needed right before the procedure? So what we did is we did this patient safety intervention where we took the simulation equipment that lives in our hospital simulation center, that's dusty, that's never used, at 2 o'clock in the morning or at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we take them and we hide them in the ED. So now whenever we have to do a central line, we practice on a task trainer. Whenever we have to do an LP, we practice on a task trainer. Whenever we need to intubate a patient, we practice on a task trainer. And this is what the HR world, the human resources world, especially if you like HBR articles, calls just-in-time training. And this is a nice way for you to really get your feet in the door in the academic arena through simulation, but through a completely different vehicle, through the lens of patient safety. And through that lens, you're affecting faculty learners and resident learners. Remember where I said it's not just even silos, it's messy? This is messy. This touches all aspects. So if you want to learn more about this, this was an SAEM post on academic life and emergency medicine. And we detailed this and how we measured this. And we have a checklist where our residents go through this, get formative feedback, and really brings to life Anders Ericsson's work on how you get mastery level. How do you get your learners to perform a procedure at mastery level when they need it most? Right? It's not all about repetition. It's not doing something over and over again. It's doing something, getting feedback, applying that feedback, doing it again differently, demonstrating things with improvement. Because if it's just about repetition, yeah, you'll improve, you'll plateau, but then at some point in time, you'll fall off that plateau. Deliberate practice is different, and this is a really nice way to do that. Am I doing okay with time? Another way, so that's low fidelity, low realism. If we want to up the realism, simulation is another vehicle for that. We wanted to see how we were doing with our TPA administration for strokes. So we had a standardized patient, an actor who we trained to come into the emergency department with an aphasia and a right-sided hemiparesis. He came in, he was triaged, people thought he was a real patient. He had a fake IV placed by one of our Confederates, somebody that was in on it. He had an MR that was generated, orders that were put in by the treating team. A technician actually brought him upstairs to the CT scan suite. The CT scan suite, once he entered, closed their doors. The people that were in there were in on it. The CT machine was turned on. He didn't go through it, so he didn't get any radiation exposure. Fake images were uploaded to PACS. The radiologists read these CT scan images. These readings were conveyed to the EM docs downstairs. The decision was made by the neurology consulting resident and team to give TPA. Pharmacy was alerted. Pharmacy came downstairs to the critical recess bay. It was a fake TPA vial. The TPA was started and TPA was pushed, and that's when the simulation was over. So we met the mark within 45 minutes. We could have done better. Then we had a debriefing. But the idea here is this is a way for you to be uber academic, interface with so many different departments, integrate one of the pedagogies of education, simulation, have your vehicle for that be patient safety and clinical quality, and affect all learners and identify those learners, that audience that gives you that passion. So again, this is just an idea here to kind of like disrupt your thinking, to show you that there are multiple pathways for you to achieve some sort of educational position outside of the typical UME, GME silos. Any questions about that? So all of us like to think about what we can do on the side. Educators now are even viewed as consultants. At your respective shops, there might be program directors that might work with other programs and help them develop other residencies that are sort of in the nascent stages of their development. And just because if you're an academic and you're an academic educator, and you do this day in and day out and know the principles around education, you can advertise yourself as an educational consultant. And that's exactly what we did with one of the sports teams in Philadelphia. So for the sports fans in the room, Philadelphia has the Philly Flyers, which is our hockey team. And they wanted us to come down and give them lectures on non-orthopedic emergencies, right? Because there's always an orthopedic surgeon at every game. But they wanted stuff about cardiac arrest, and what if somebody seizes on the ice? A couple of years ago, one of their players sustained a really bad neck laceration from one of the skates and was exsanguinating all over the ice, which is kind kind of grim and kind of crazy. Facial injuries, airway emergencies. So they wanted us to come there. They approached us. They wanted to come there and just give them lectures. So instead, what we did is we packed up our bags. You ever heard about ice-capades? I call these nerd-capades. So we had our residents, and they dressed up in their gear, and we did simulation on the ice to see exactly how they would behave in the real environment. Way better, much more effective, much more robust than giving them a lecture. Right? I think some of the things that came to light when they were doing this is, do we stabilize on the ice or do we not? Do we shock and defibrillate on the ice, or do we take them off the ice and defibrillate? So some questions that we never really think about until we're exposed in that milieu for us to be challenged to make those decisions. So my take-home point here is that, yes, you're an academic. Yes, you're an educator academic. But you can actually think outside the box and be involved in parallel programs and even function as an educational consultant. What about educator as innovator? We have dedicated tracks now at our shops about how to be innovative and how to be an innovator, but education can be that vehicle. If you're interested in some of the innovations that have come from education and some of the innovations that you want to integrate into your respective shops, Academic Life and Emergency Medicine has something known as the IDEA series, Ideas in Didactics and Educational Activities. Some of the featured stuff on this was submitted by our group. Now, our new faculty orientation consists of an escape room. We take our faculty to an escape room. We wrote this up. It's on the website, but we really want our nurses and our doctors to communicate really well. This is Teresa Chan on the left, if you know her. She's from Canada, and she does a lot of work with Academic Life and Emergency Medicine. And our paper, Trapped as a Group, Escape as a Team, applying gamification to incorporate team-building skills through an escape room experience. We've identified common themes that happen in an escape room, and we made parallels to how they impact the workflow in the ED. We've also linked them with ACGME milestones, and we also have theoretical underpinnings that shows why they're important. So it's like a simulation, but a fun simulation. So how many of you watch the Food Network? How many of you watch the show Chopped? Right? So Chopped is where they give chefs 3 random ingredients. It could be chocolate, salmon, and Twizzlers. Right? And they have to create a meal or an entree or a dish with that. So we did the same thing. We have our own Chopped version. So we served as educational consultants for our residency, and every resident group got a basket, and they got 2 history elements, 2 physical exam elements, and 2 diagnostic elements. And in teams, they had to put together a narrative that ties in all of this that can explain what that patient has. So it can't just be made up. It actually has to make sense. It has to be something where the patient is altered because he or she ingested something that made them agitated, that made them sweaty, that got an EKG that was with a QT prolongation and had an elevated creatinine. So it fosters collaborative learning and really brings to light a lot of the educational theories that we're talking about. And then our judges, our APDs, really rate them according to their creativity, their diagnostic accuracy, and then they also have to make an argument as to why their diagnosis is the best diagnosis. As we learned at SAEM and for those at CORD not that long ago, gamification is really big. We've had a hard time with our in-service scores and our residents with toxicology. Their in-service scores with regards to toxicology were always really low. So what we did is we put together a toxicology board game. We call it the Toxidrome Challenge, where they get different play sets and they get different game pieces, and they have to work together in groups to really apply some critical thinking to solve things. And this is also on the website. And this is a poster that we created before. Teaching communication skills is a soft skill that's hard to teach, but using some of this innovation, using some of that educational theory, we had a workshop where we gave triads of residents 2 bags. One resident received a pre-made Lego structure consisting of 15 pieces. Another resident received a bag with the pieces needed to make that structure. These residents sat back to back with one another, so Aya couldn't see how Ed was building, and Ed couldn't see what Aya was holding, and then we had somebody that was watching their progress and looking at the communication skills. This, too, is on the Academic Life and Idea series. And the idea is we wanted them to produce an identical structure. What we found, though, is that So that's correct, and that's wrong. So image on the left is correct, image on the right is wrong. So it was very interesting. We saw a lot of these enantiomers, or mirror images, created. Does anybody have any hypotheses as to why these mirror images were created? Right. So what's left for you is not left. Excuse me. What's left for you is not left for me. And think about teaching procedures. Think about where you're sort of sitting at the head of the bed or at the foot of the bed, and somebody's putting an ultrasound. So that frame of reference is really important, and this actually shaped them. So if you're interested in reading that, that's online as well. We spoke a little bit about research, and for a very long time, educational research was shunned upon, but you can actually conduct some pretty robust research in education as an academician. So this is one that looked at learning styles. Do learning styles make a difference? If you happen to be a visual learner, and I taught to you in a visual aspect, would your outcomes be better than an unmatched pairing? So the data shows that learning style doesn't make a difference, but it wasn't really demonstrated for procedures. So for example, if you never learned how to put in an IV before, excuse me, if you never learned how to place an IV before and you identified yourself as an auditory learner, if I taught you according to an auditory learning style, would you be more successful? And we found this was the first procedural study to show that learning styles make no difference in learning outcomes. Yeah, students like it, and that was the only thing that was successful, but at the end of the day, learning styles are hogwash. And this is real, legit educational research that can inform the way that we teach our learners. Emotional intelligence, another thing that's very hot right now, especially when we think about resident mental health, burnout, and suicidality. We did a study to look at what are the EQ trends in residency over time. There is no increase in EQ because EQ can be increased over time, but what we found was our second-year residents had a statistically significant decrease in emotional intelligence across these 5 indices of EQ relative to their PGY1 and PGY3 peers, as well as the general population. A very interesting finding, especially when you consider burnout, especially when you consider mental health, especially when you consider their risk. So when we did a deeper dive into the data, we found that in the second year, their self-regard plummets, their optimism plummets, their stress tolerance plummets, their assertiveness plummets, their ability to express their emotions and tell people that they're having a really hard time plummets. This is educational research. This is important research. This is important for us to know. So even as educators, those questions that we have as educators can be constructed into studyable questions that can make an impact on our audiences. So right now, we're putting together a qualitative evaluation to find out what are the themes, what are the things that happen in that transition from PGY1 to PGY2 that can explain this decrease in emotional intelligence in our PGY2 cohort. So I spoke a lot, perhaps a little bit too much, but I just wanted to make the case that there are many, many avenues to pursue a career in academics as an educator and some of the weird variables and pathways that you can take. So with that, I'm going to make some sort of general recommendations. Number 1, identify a mentor. Identify a mentor early. It doesn't have to be one mentor. There was this great article in the Harvard Business Review that said that every person needs their own board of directors. So it's okay if you have 3 or 4 mentors. Let them be your own board. Let them guide you. Let them direct you. Seek out local advice. I guarantee you that there's somebody in your department that serves as a liaison with the medical school. If your medical school has a dean for faculty affairs or faculty development, don't be embarrassed to email them early on, even junior, just for them to know you, know your face, and help guide your CV and guide your academic trajectory early on. We spoke a lot about attending faculty development programming. I think this is important. It doesn't have to be programming at your institution. It could be programming that's offered nationally through our society and through non-EM societies like the AAMC. Consider a degree. This is totally optional, but it might really accelerate your career trajectory if you do see yourself in a dean's office down the line. Again, for your consideration. Identifying your passion will ultimately be dictated by what your audience is. Is it students? Is it residents? Is it faculty? Is it making faculty better teachers? Or is it all of the above? And as a corollary to this, think about what environment you like to teach in. Is it the classroom? Does that mean you should probably move into the medical school early on? Or is it in the clinical learning environment? Write your mission statement. Go beyond the 1 or 5 or 10-year plan that your chair is going to ask you to create. At the end of the year, you'll have your annual performance review. But I think writing a mission statement makes you think more critically about what the impact is going to be of your career. So think about writing a mission statement because this will challenge you and this will expose some of your values. Your teaching portfolio. How many of you have a teaching portfolio? How many of you know about a teaching portfolio but haven't started yet? How many of you have no idea what a teaching portfolio is? Okay, so we all know what a CV is. A teaching portfolio is where you capture everything that you've done educationally. Every single workshop, the evaluations of that workshop, the number of learners you've targeted in that workshop, the lectures that you've given, the workshops that you've given, the conferences that you've attended, your educational philosophy. Every institution, every organization has its own format for a teaching portfolio. When you go up for promotion from assistant to associate, you're going to need a teaching portfolio. In fact, if you go from clinical instructor to assistant professor, you will need a teaching portfolio. You will definitely need a teaching portfolio when you go from associate to professor. And it's really hard to do that in hindsight. It's going to be sort of like archaeology. We're going to start thinking back and looking for evaluations. So I urge you, in fact, I implore you to start developing your teaching portfolio today because you're going to forget everything. This, being here today, goes in your teaching portfolio. Where does it go? Professional development programming. SAEM 2018 Junior Faculty Development Programming. So it's these subtle things that we don't think about that need to be captured because this is currency and this is going to count when you go for your academic promotion. This is my favorite one. Keep exposing yourself to crazy ideas. I think the reason my pathway in academics was so circuitous is because I just sort of stayed within my silo. And every time I heard a new idea, I was like hearing it for the first time. So when you hear about these crazy visionaries, like we have Bon Ku at Jefferson who does a lot of design thinking. Most people don't even know what design thinking is in medicine and emergency medicine, but it's really making a big impact. I think get to know who these people are. Follow them on Twitter. Follow people with crazy ideas on Twitter because the earlier you're exposed to that crazy idea, the earlier you can find out what is your passion, all right, as opposed to getting to that crazy idea 10 years later and sort of saying, you know, I heard about that, but I really never looked into that because it never seemed applicable to me. I never thought design thinking is applicable to me, but as an educator, educating audiences and learners successfully is all about design thinking. Opportunities in the medical school. If you have a medical school affiliated with your department, find out what opportunities exist. They're always looking for small group session leaders or case-based learning leaders. You know, the time that they give you might not be too much, but as a junior faculty member, it's a really great way to enter and sneak into the medical school, show your face, show your skills, show your passion, be a great educator, get those students to see what a great educator you are, get great evaluations, and then what are you going to do? Capture all that into your teaching portfolio. This way, when a position becomes open, they know who you are. You know who the movers and shakers in the medical school are. So unless you do this early, you know, you're really doing yourself a disservice. Again, this is if, in fact, you see yourself for a leadership position in a medical school. Balance. Balance is tricky, right? And I think as you're sort of thinking about what your dream career would look like 10 years from now, I don't really believe in balance because I don't think everything is ever in a state of balance. I think it's how well and how integrated work life is with personal life. So you need to think about that because as you get more involved in the medical school, as you get more involved in these opportunities, you're going to be offered funding to buy down your time. But dollar for dollar, these are not the same. If the medical school buys down 50% of your time and gives you 50% FTE, that FTE is capped. It's based on an FTE total that is less than your salary, which means that even though the medical school thinks that you'll be doing 50% of your work there on their duties, in fact, you're only getting paid for maybe a third of it. Does that make sense? So if I'm the medical school and I said, congratulations, I would love to hire you as the assistant dean for student affairs, I want to buy down 50% of your time, that 50% of your time can be money that's benchmarked to $180,000, where your salary might be $250,000, which means that when I'm your chair, I can't really go down on your hours by 50%. I need to do it commensurate to that dollar value. So these are tricky things that you only consider later on when you're confronted with these mathematics. So I guess for me, advising you now is to think about what is that integration? What does that look like? What would be the sweet spot? So a lot of ideas, a lot of information, but hopefully I was able to reflect a little bit on some of my decisions and help maybe inform some of the decisions that you're thinking about right now. So again, hopefully you're thinking a little bit more big picture about pathways to medical education leadership. I shared my experiences a little bit with you, spoke about the importance for ongoing, sustained, effective, robust, professional faculty development programming, and then hopefully you have some very specific general strategies to go home with and reflect on. And if you have any additional questions, if you want to talk more about teaching portfolios, if you want to talk about teaching philosophies, if you just want to talk about any of these concepts that I spoke about, this is my email address, that's my Twitter handle, and I would love to continue the dialogue offline. That's it.